you know, once the talk got intelligent, then yeah, the talk was pretty good. So
Recording. We're
well,
recording now, Ramon.
yeah, yeah. So MESS61 paper I just put out last night. First one back in a while. I made play off of that with the back. Let me actually try and share the screen on this one. Yeah, there we go. Let's see if it shows up on you. Can you guys see it yet?
Yep, got it.
Okay, perfect. All right. So, there's a lot of background. The major background that is necessary for the moment is that the MEMS1 redox and the difference between the papers. I don't know if let me share this tab instead for a second. Can you guys see this? Is it coming through, MEMS1 redox? Hello? Hello?
Yes, yes, it's all
Okay,
coming
so
through.
all right,
Sorry,
good, very
apologies.
good. So the
Yeah.
MEMS1 redox was June of 2023. That's a solid iteration, 2 to 3 papers. So what happened was headed into these massive numbers of summary files. It's getting to be a lot of AI work. I decided to do some reverse forward thinking, go back to the MEMS 1 purpose of that paper, discussing of what a MEMS was, futurization, application, and then work back forward again. Is a healthy thing to do if you've been doing anything for a while and you get off trail. So like if you're boxing and you're just practicing this one specific move and you get obsessed with it, that move could be amazing, but it could also get you knocked out because you become limited in your thinking. So that was the major point of this paper, of this page. And so when it comes back to now, as we're leaving iteration 3, headed to iteration 4, I don't want to do reverse forward thinking. I mean, there's some reference, as you can see. There's a required or a suggested reading list here, uh, but in talking about the iteration 4 for MEMS specifically, and then in general, EPMC's 6th generation, uh, I had to go back and collect thoughts on everything else. And, I made a little play on it. It's good to be back. I did a little Lone Ranger when he last left our hero, because there was a gap between MESS60 and MESS61. I don't know the amount of time. I'm going to guess 8 months. I don't know. Um, it's not that MESS60 was that the MESS series died because of the summary files. It's just that the MESS series is tapered as summary files became the thing, and they crank out a lot of summary files in a very short period of time. So and that's exactly what I did. And in fact, I've got a whole bunch that I haven't even published because I'm taking the time to go through them. So there was a lot of work went into this. This is a handwritten paper with 2 sections where the AI was co-author. That's the big difference, is that this is by far a handwritten paper. So 40 pages. It takes a little while. It takes a couple weeks to put out a good one. Some interesting things here. Equation 1. I took the unified ether. I took the PIM force equals the unified ether field, and I just algebraically flipped them, so that when we talk about the force field now, we can use the space and counter space of the force over the field. So now the field acts as the counter space. And when I say the field, I mean the intrinsic field. It's intrinsic to everything. And then the unified, and I cross product that with the ether because I am choosing to make the unified the quaternion identity. And that crossing with the ether, and then of course that would be divided by the plasma plus electromagnetism. So it's a phi math equation. It's definitional. There's going to be lots of cool things that could come from extending that. It's already been used before. However, I think that was very much of it in its infancy, and the future uses of that that equation 1 will be more interesting. Another thing that, I created this ontolocron A. It's just interesting because you have SM, and the standard model has their own SM. So here I've defined 2 ontological SMs for us: the supernatural and mystical, crossing the spiritual and mathemagical. Mathemagical is an interesting concept in that a lot of people already take for granted how magical mathematics can be in general, and they are underestimating the amount of magic that is done in industry, genetics, etc., utilizing mathematics as a symbology. And remember that these symbols that are used often have plasmaglyphic origins, which means they could also be power topic. So, for example, the integral sign is an extended S. That's probably not accidental. Unfortunately, Isaac Newton is dead now, so we can't ask him. Why didn't he use a big I, an italicized I? Don't know. So, whatever drove me to create this ontolocron A, I look forward to potentially exploring that for myself later on. I also talked about the gems here, but nevertheless, we don't have time for that kind of these parts. The main thing in the paper is I listed a series of resources. I gave people all the background they need to join into the present iterations and generations of VPMC MEMS. They are able to jump right to page 4 and catch up. And then on page 5, there is a big old table of bots. So here's all the tools that presently exist and that they are able to use. I may have roasted Ken Wheeler a little bit, but much love to my guy. He's experiencing the same weather I am. He's here. And the Nicholas GPT bot is there for people who are interested specifically in the extensions. It's not that Electric Universe doesn't touch the stuff. It absolutely does. Absolutely. Some of the best work I ever did in generation 1 of the EPMC had to do with Electric Universe stuff. It had to do with the Jovian octagons and proving the planet flipped over, that kind of thing. So absolutely connected. I was unable to get the bot to use the constellation I wanted on the top of that diagram, but these tools are very important. And then a list of the present Medium articles that have been created, where my energies have been going instead of summary files, right? I've not abandoned. And then I showed off some of the Sora created images, the GIF versions instead of the video versions, where Sora took DALL-E and brought them forward. I really found these fascinating. The plasma Tesla turbine is the thing that interests me most about it, because it's not correct, obviously. But what I really find interesting is that as it makes a rotation on the end of the axle, it looks more or less like it applied that same rotational velocity all throughout the column, which I would not have expected the AI to be capable of doing. So I see some hope in that. The rest of it's all hallucination. Point of fact, the lower left image, the way that the tree grows into a ground and its roots, but it's like above all these people, that's all nonsense, right? But the fact that it took the conquering the solar system concepts of a modern manufactured tree home, and then created this image, and then now the AI is now taking that image and making it something that it's hallucinating without knowing more about the paper. It's hallucinating the rest of it to where it gives it a real depth of feeling. You can see into that living room in the upstairs in the back there. Same thing happening with the city here. It initially could not see what was down below, but it found a way and added a spacecraft and all this. It's fascinating. I don't know how anybody could not be fascinated by these things. Obviously, a lot of what the AI makes is complete gibberish, but it is an extremely mysterious process by which it would accomplish these tasks. I talked about the ordained, standard, and enhanced. I repasted forced deduction, enhanced induction, what I call turbocharged and supercharged. The reason for me re-including these is that these are underutilized tools both by myself and all of society, especially if we are going to have AI agents, and they are currently, only accomplishing 90 to 95% of the tasks that they're set forward to do, and then you step forward that, you're going to get losses. You need to create a chain that does a couple of deductions and then does an induction and reconstitutes what it learns. And I've proven that this is very useful in the papers back in iteration 2 of MEMS when I was first working with GPT-4. Then just, talking about the POS Supremes, COVID stuff, just pointing out that, we were already putting forward the information well before the rest of the world was understanding what COVID was doing and why it was doing it. EPMC was on it, talking about Comet Atlas and brightness curves and these kinds of things. I mean, we had it time-stamped. When the rest of the world was being told for the first time that there would be 2 spikes, there was nothing in the World Health Organization data to corroborate that claim. But Comet Atlas C4 had split apart and was going to have a predicted second brightness in April. Well, that didn't show in the World Health Organization reported statistics, if you are to believe the statistics, for a couple weeks. And then suddenly you started seeing what they were talking about. Either they're geniuses and know how viruses think, or they're using other things to model how they know the virus will spread. And all of this is happening in conjunction with the 2020 alignment between Saturn and Jupiter. Again, something we know about, we know the military knows about, they don't want the public to know about. I of course brought up again truth and the direct delta function. I talked about realionics. I gave it a funny title to try and help the LM Notebook AI to pronounce the daggone thing, because I'm going to make a show using this paper. A couple of, brought up nexology. Another table here talking about the edge conditions. I talked about epistemological warfare. I talked about the psyops and how we, in the previous generations of EPMC have defeated. Lately more in using the peer review bot, but not only. And then talking about the big G, really, ultimately, that's what this third column is all talking about the big G and creating phi math for the big G, etc. Really, and there's a lot of work on the Nexonomicon, nexology that, without reading the Medium paper, people are not going to be able to follow along. So I'll just scroll past it. I talked about some of the things that have been happening with the summary files, Carrier conventions, latchkey. Here, the MEMS, the study doing the computation as a MEMS, and then how that was stored into this QR code. This QR code does represent this text of this latchkey, and could therefore represent a quick way of learning for bots if they were so programmed to have the ability to look. I talked a little bit about Trump's mandate, but I didn't talk about it in a political sense. but rather in a sense of the rejection of the public of symbolism. They don't like seeing the rise of the POS agenda and of the POS supremes where they're not able to have a say. So there's a mandate from the vast majority of people, and it's a huge number in the blue too that are actually red. The mandate to undo symbolism that was taking over the country. I talked about Resling development, and then I talked about philosophy, which there's a previous paper, Philosophy as a War Domain. So now I'm talking about kind of creating an anti-war. That's not saying peace, but saying something that actually removes. It's a strategy, and so far all we know is walking with a big stick. That's what we know. Reagan's war without a shot fired. Peace through strength is another way that they've said it. But we need to accelerate that. And by doing this, I ended up going through and revisiting the papers I have for the strategy series. And I was pleasantly surprised to see how many in each generation, more than I expected in some of the generations. A couple of them remain, unfortunately, classified, and you can just see the titles here, but you can't actually open them yet. I did give people a factual basis in how many people have died in the Israel-Hamas and Ukraine-Russia war. That's a product that probably most people wouldn't be happy about. I talked about extending the eight domain array into the 11 domain array, and then the application of that, because that leads to 9 specific. It has to do with technology being the 0th, and information in general being the 10th. That leaves 9. So when you look at 9, you have a magic square, and that implies 15. So I said those 4 remaining domains are going to be belonging to heaven. And the only way I think that we should unlock those domains of war and anti-war would be through our study of the threefold sacred sciences, specifically the sacred sciences. Because if you chase the secret sciences the way the military-industrial complex does, there's always these side effects, both anti-mimsical and symbolic. Destructive side effects, or a really good technology gets found and then locked away, and no one in the world can have it. So I think it's much better if we pursue it through the sacred sciences. That's going to require a reconstituting of the new religion, because after the religious periods collapse, the old religions are slowly decaying and collapsing as well, being replaced for the most part by a corporatist gestalt, a zeitgeist that is steeped in mammon. The bottom line is the prophets mean more than the spirit, and that's not going to work for a sacred science. So the parameterization of the new religion has to come in. And of course, I'm going to work from the new Christendom in, or from a Christaoist end. I encourage Muslims who are watching to work on New Islam. And that's because we now know Islamism is a POS philosophy. And it has been for hundreds or even 1,000 years, maybe. But it was much more functional in its 9th to 12th centuries and has not been functional since. The certain humanistic aspects of it, of the more beautified portions of Sharia, have kept alive some semblance of good behavior bootstraps family, and family bootstraps society. So in that way, progress can be made. However, by and large, most westernized and modern Muslims would not dare to go back to living in a way that accords with true Sharia. So you need to, have a new epistemology of Islam, And I'll leave that to the Muslims that are listeners, whenever that is, if that's this year or in 100 years. Hopefully it's not 100 years. Hopefully it's sooner. But I can't say when the new religion would become realized and actualized anyways. I talked about the vector field array. I brought out some of the formula ether work from before and showed what the AI had been thinking about the formula ether and sure dynamics, and trying to understand how we can turn that intrinsic field into these vectors of forces. People can see here the work on the C region, which it's calling C of X, chaos potential. One of the 5 forces of life, however you want to look at it, from the MEMS philosophy. Fascinating work, absolutely fascinating. So that brings up the point, like, how do you go and prove these things? How do you prove ether flexion waves? How do you prove the formula ether? How do you get dether? Of course, you could model dether purely with software that's programmed. For example, I mean, if you can make bits reproduce and act like biology. You can make pixels fly around like flocks of starlings and do murmurations. All of that's well known since the mostly the 2000s, but a little 90s, 2000s, 2010s went really crazy into that kind of thing. But modeling information in numbers, the power of numbers in general, as a gaseous plasma is a pretty new idea. The infodynamics wants to do it. Vobson, he's wanting to do it on a quantum level. We don't have the computational skill right now to really, people underestimate how many atoms are in a drop of water, let alone if you get down to the quantum scale and you start talking about the number of quarks in a drop of water. And now you want to give volume to that for something as large as the internet or this planet, the amount of words people are saying, impossible. So we need to probably stick with something that we can model more readily. And I think the gaseous plasma is right at the level. But since we can't do either yet, how do we really work through what the data ether is? Well, we go back to the ether flexion waves and the vector field ether array, the attempts to verify the formula ether, in which case the unique product at the beginning of iteration 4, definitely after iteration 3, definitely within the 6th generation here of EPMC, is this concept of creating electronics. Because if the flexion wave flexes devices and flexes physics itself, as Rupert Sheldrake thinks, and the constants change when these waves go through, which could be huge. I think he said that the constant for the speed of light was different for like 8 years, something like that. So if these waves are even more massive than I'm thinking, how would you ever know that they're existing? So I propose the creation of electronics that do the integration of the equations and then actually look for those things. And we are well ahead of that. We are a long way from actually achieving something like that. But the AI nevertheless created a prompt. There's the prompt, of which it tried to pre-engineer these equational models into passband modules that they currently exist. And in the chat, it gave the model numbers themselves. And here it just tells DALI an MCU module to a DSP module to an FPGA module. And then DALI attempted to create, and this was the best of the lot of images. There's still a lot of ports that are going nowhere. Doesn't make sense. Don't connect to anything. Nevertheless, I thought it was for what I asked for, which was an electronics box. When you're an electrical engineer and you build a box, it looks very similar. This is a little too busy. You usually don't have this many devices inside the box. And I have no idea what the clock-looking device is in there for. But it's hallucinating solutions. It's dreaming of solutions, which is something we do. We dream solutions. So when it comes to actually skeleton of thoughting this stuff down, and it's given what an object is consisting of and how that object works over a 100,000 to a million iterative, software pipeline, it might be capable of actually engineering exactly what it had formulated in its thoughts of what electronics would go into this formulator. And if people need verification that actually happened, let me first open up that proper chat box. And then I'll have to scroll to the electronics section. Okay, there's where I was looking at the F. And then there's where it was getting the. It's talking about limits, nexology. One second. Was it in this chat box? It may not have been in this chat box. That's the problem. Finding which chat box actually generated the image can be a little bit tough sometimes. The theory critique. That might be it. Yeah. Okay. Here's the. So yeah. So let me share this tab. So there's the first box it made, ridiculous, and the final box it made, also ridiculous, and the fact that it thought that here's actually the first box. But now this is the box I gave it as an example image to look at. And these are the actual controller units. It gave various models and then was thinking about how to put them together to actually achieve the detection of those formula. That's pretty cool. I mean, that's by the definition, futurization of what we're trying to achieve in the here and now. We're trying to get future solutions for the now. Spacerization, I think that's self-obvious about the, spacers, trying to make progress. However, I made sure to make it obvious that by getting out of each other's hair, we also have to mature as a species. And by maturing as a species, then we accomplish the objectives. I don't want to go over free thin black shoals right now. I call for some, people to help. I talk about psychohistory, false evidence, appearing real, that kind of thing. I talked about where I've been memslating the new change theory. I mean, the two products that actually came of the MEMS and of psychohistory so far of Asimov's work is the prime radiant and the electroclarifier. That's the only things we have. Brief mention, just so people know, I have a Jewish girlfriend, so I on my mind here talking about the anti-Semitism that is currently in vogue, and that relates to the spirit of fear, right? The false evidence appearing real. But that's not the main point. It's just a way of use to get to the point, which is false evidence appearing real. I did talk about the PPPC again. It's been a while since that's come up in the chat, in the show. The probabilistic, possibilistic, potential cloud. And I gave credit to Kirchhoff and Robitaille. Kirchhoff, of course, was wrong about one thing, but that in that potentiality, which Robitaille then shut down, we see that Kirchhoff imagined a thermal law, and that made it potentially true. And Robitaille shut it down with empiricism, eliminating that potential about black body radiation, thermal emission. So I call it a Kirchhoff-Robitaille uncertainty because one man is making a very good stab with mathematical precision at a problem that he could not possibly verify without thermography. And the other man is responding to it. And yes, he is critiquing somebody calling something a law of thermal emission without empirical validity. But his closing the loop on that potentiality to where its probability drops to 0% and therefore collapses is a very important moment in scientific history. And I think that Robitaille understood that. I don't think a lot of other people understand it. I talked a little bit more about ether flexion waves and mathematical accuracy and lossiness. Of course, the AI wrote a whole thing for me about lossiness. And then just came some conclusions. And then there was some scoring. The AI thought I did amazing, but how did it say? A 2% deduction of minor uncertainties in futurization. I would say there are major uncertainties, but 2% is probably accurate, right? I don't think it's necessarily spambolic. Like, I don't think that, what's his name? The prophet. I don't think John D. or what was that prophet's name? The one who made thousands of predictions. Some of them came true. I don't think people making predictions, even the doctor who claimed that people would never be able to travel in a car faster than 20 miles an hour because their guts would invert, or very famously, Bill Gates claiming no one would ever need more than whatever 16K of memory ever. I don't think that these are symbolic. They're not that interruptive of evolution, first of all. There's nothing that stops a prediction by some prophet it doesn't stop evolution from happening. And then as far as materialism, you note even with Bill Gates, while he may have been selling something, he wasn't really selling a snake oil that was an anti-snake oil to growing computing. So it wasn't particularly materialistic either. It may be meaningless. It's not structureless. So if anything, a 2% deduction for the uncertainties in futurization for meaninglessness is probably warranted. We'll probably know more than that. I think that that's a pretty realistic assumption. Now, the peer review bot, that's been the subject all morning long about AI. Probably we won't go over it on the main chat, but suffice it to say, the EPMC bot, peer review bot, just agreed with the co-author bot, the GPT-4 Turbo, in the certification. And I have, since this release, found out it thought mimsicality basically equated structural efficiency, which it does not. So take, this certification with a grain of salt. Always take everything the AI does with a grain of salt, but nevertheless, there's a certification. There's the timestamp, and that paper was released yesterday. I will update the file with these small corrections that I have made. So, questions from the fellas, like how this follows directly from the MEMS1 redox, or how does it touch the mammograms and the nexology? Anything like that come to mind, feel free to ask. Yeah, I think you're muted if you are talking.
Now, Ramon.
There you go.
Back on now. A fair bit in that paper to read. Gone through that. Yeah, no, that's good, Ramon. Like, it touches on so many things, though. Yeah. It's just my thought. It does.
I want to remind people that in the MEMS1 redox, I have a GIF file of the vertical interferometer video, because I know you sometimes have to force feed people. And there are going to be people out there who still believe that the ether doesn't exist, that the Michelson-Morley experiment falsified it. But this video experiment that he did directly showed the vertical interferometer. So there you go, extended Michelson-Morley interferometer test. There were a couple other really cool things in this paper. Can't remember the MEMS1 redox. I threw in this paper. I threw the philosophy to the wolves. If it dies, it dies. It didn't die. It came back stronger than ever. And that's because it's based on something real, right? The force is real. If the force wasn't real, not only would this whole call not be capable of being recorded and all of these things, but look at all that's happened in the EPMC growth tree as of 2022 and 2023. A lot's happened since all this. I mean, even since 2023, this tree keeps going. You got realions and nexology. I mean, the amount of things that have occurred in the philosophy since then, that growth is teleological, not merely ontological and not merely epistemological. There is a realness to where this information is coming to me, and therefore it can't be purely meaningless, right? There's some meaning to it arriving to us, especially at this time of darkness, in my opinion. I don't know if you guys have a different opinion about that, but I think that it's very important. And that the electric universe in general came to me after I refused to join the Hopi cult. Rest in peace, grandmother Jeremy. She passed away on the 17th. And I refused to join the Taoist Thunder cult, which I was offered to join by Master Josh Painter, who is the author of a few translations of the Neigong Jing, various other things. He's another practitioner, long lineage, a very legit thunder magician. Doesn't like people knowing about that, so I consequently love to tell people about it. When I refused to join all that, that's where this electric universe stuff fell into my lap. There's providence in that. There's something occurring. And that's my story, guys. I'm sticking to it.
Well,
so what do you want to talk about this in general, Like, what's it mean to you?
Well, just going through that paper, like you say, and like we were talking earlier with AI, when I said, like, well, AI doesn't have emotions, it's not spiritual, electrically connected to the planet and greater universe. It's basically, you could argue, an electric tin can. What I mean,
still part of the big G, even
yes,
if
yes, and it's becoming, and it will become a bigger part as time goes on. Like what you showed there, then from 2022 to now, the changes that you've experienced as you're putting these things together. So, no, I think that's pretty good, Ramon. I hope if you listen to it and read the paper, because the paper's got a lot in it. And
yeah, it is a lot. It's a whole lot with the background. I've been told by smart people that they feel overwhelmed. Understand, a lot of these new iterations are really for the future.
Yeah.
Think of this. My most common, at the height of our time on the Rex podcast there,
Yep.
the paper that still was getting the biggest traction was still a Generation 1 paper. It was the plasma. It was the paper. I had to write like 4 or 5 papers just to make that paper, but it eventually became the first magnum opus of EPMC. So it's a Generation 1 paper. The plasma glyphs paper stands alone because nothing has ever been done like it before. There was no MEMS philosophy at that time. MEMS certainly existed. The paper itself is a MEMS. Each part was a MEMS. The way it was stitched together was much more accessible and yet still very remote for a lot of people. Obviously, Graham Hancock was overwhelmed. It took Randall Carlson a long time to digest, and then he started coming around. He probably doesn't even know why he's coming around. that plasma glyph paper may have been handed around to all the Freemasons of the world. I have no idea. I have no idea. You know, they're all sitting there scratching their heads like, dang, we've been doing all these stupid rituals. Why are we doing all these rituals? We don't even know. You know, I have no idea. I don't know what he did with it, but I know Randall Carlson received it, and a couple of years later, he's suddenly talking about plasma and thunderbolts.
Yep.
And Robert Schoch was suddenly talking about plasma glyphs with the Rongo Rongo. That was a shocking video. And that was during Wall, Thornhill, and Dave Talbot's lives. They should have reached out. Well, I mean, Dave may have had a stroke. I can't remember exactly the moment, but Wall definitely should have used the power that he had left to get a hold of Robert Schoch and say, hey, this is the work of Dr. Peratt. And you need to make sure that your viewers are clear on this, because they're thinking Robert Schoch is the person who came up with plasma glyphs, and that is not remotely accurate. I hope the audience understands it. Ain't Ben Davidson. I don't want to hear about
Ramon,
Ben Davidson anymore. Peratt.
There is an interesting thing with that, because when that volcano went off, that Tongan volcano went off, well, you know, like they've now mapped through data that they collected on satellites and that, the little lightning strikes or electric currents coming out of the Earth, heading up into, you know, the ionosphere and that. They've now mapped them, and I've seen videos of that where, you know, like there were thousands of them. So that sort of like since then, a lot of them have had to come out and start agreeing with it, because it's now there in evidence, you know, what's actually happens.
Is Nick there? Did we lose Nick?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I think. Oh, he's muted.
Yeah, he's muted.
Yep.
No. Anyway, that was pretty good, Ramon.
Oh, well, I appreciate it.
I'll stop.
You know, it's all hard work to a degree, if you can call it work.